Hawaii has among the highest taxes in the nation, and already legislators are talking about raising them again. Today I have Lowell Kalapa, president of the Tax Foundation of Hawaii, who's going to share with us some of his insights on some of these proposals and what he thinks will happen this legislative session. Aloha, Lowell. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you for having me. It's always enjoyable to be here.
Thank you. Okay, well, tell us about, can you maybe give us a little overview of the session coming up and what you think some of the big issues will be?
Well, I think regardless of the fact that everybody seems to be just elated that the economy is doing well and tax revenues as forecasted are doing very well, I think we are still in for a very difficult financial session. We have a cloud hanging over us called unfunded liabilities for the state pension system and the state employees' public health system. We're talking about $22 billion of unfunded liabilities that we need to start paying down. So while there may be a lot of revenues flowing into the state coffers, there's a lot of demand for those dollars.
Now, one of the biggest tax debates that comes up every year is whether or not we should raise the general excise tax. And I was hoping you could explain, because a lot of people don't understand why we don't have a sales tax. We have a general excise tax. Maybe you can explain that.
And I was a little taken aback the other day when I understood that there were teachers were calling for just a penny, just another penny on the general excise tax, or as they said, another penny on the sales tax. And what those teachers don't understand is that, yes, we don't have a retail sales tax, as you would find in the state of California or Illinois. We have a gross income called gross income tax or a general excise tax, which is much more comprehensive than the retail sales tax. Unlike the retail sales tax, our general excise tax is imposed on everything that basically moves. Any transaction that occurs, there are very few that are exempt, is taxed at either the 4% or the 0.5% rate. And that's another point to make. In most cases in other states that have the retail sales tax, it is truly at retail. It's only when the purchase is for final consumption. We tax not only that purchase for final consumption, but also purchases that are made for resale. So when a good or service passes from one business to another business to then be resold to the final consumer, there's a 0.5% general excise tax. And it is unusual, yes. We also tax what we call business inputs, things that are purchased by businesses and consumed by businesses in the production of income, and usually at the 4% retail rate. So for example, why I think a lot of us who are familiar with the tax are taken aback with some aghast and saying, no, you can't do that, is one of the biggest overhead costs of all businesses here in Hawaii is their occupancy or rent. So a retail store at Ala Moana, or even a store in a small, shopping center, strip mall, will be paying rent that is imposed with the 4% general excise tax. So that adds to the cost. If you raise that tax rate from 4 to 5, then the cost of that rent goes up in a direct line relationship, and then the cost of the extra percentage point needs to be amortized in the cost of the goods and services sold in that particular retail outlet or in a service outlet. So all of the warehousing, for example, when we bring, say a grocery wholesaler brings a whole bunch of cereal into the state and warehouses for 30 or 60 days, the cost of the warehouse and the GE, or the general excise tax imposed on it, will be plugged into the cost of the cereal when it's finally sold at the retail store. So the multiplier effect has a dramatic effect on the cost of living and doing business here in Hawaii. A study done almost 20, 25 years ago, and people still refer to it, points out that if you compare the tax base of the general excise tax to a tax base of a retail sales tax, there is a dramatic difference. And the way they did it was measured against a state's personal income for that state, or the wealth of that state. And we like to look at California as our sister state. And just as a comparison, back then in the 1989 study, it found that Hawaii's base for the general excise tax was equal to almost 150% of our total personal income, our total wealth that this state produces. By comparison, the retail sales tax base for the California sales tax represented only about 50% of the total personal income in that state. The closest state that comes to Hawaii is New Mexico, with about an 89 or 88 percent of total personal income. That's the base of their sales tax. So it is a truly expansive tax. The other question I always get in hearings is that, well, why don't we go to a retail sales tax? Well, if our lawmakers wanted the same kind of money we're getting out of that general excise tax, we would need a tax rate of somewhere around 11 or 12% to generate the same amount of money that the 4% rate generates.
It hides, really, how high the taxes are, don't you think?
It certainly does, because we don't often think of the fact that in California, if I call a plumber to come out to my house and fix my plugged drain or my leaking toilet, that I have to pay a 4% tax on his services. In California, there is no tax because it's a service. As a result, in order to recapture that, they have to impose a higher rate on the goods that are subject to the retail sales tax. So
now, what about like food and prescription drugs and doctor's visits?
They add to the base, and it allows us to keep that rate very low to 4%. That's true. Because California does exempt food and drugs, prescription drugs, if we likened ourselves to the California sales tax with those huge exemptions, we would need a tax rate on par of about 16 or 17% to generate the same kind of money we get out of the 4% general excise tax.
But we do tax medical services and...
We do tax medical services
and food.
Proprietary drugs and food. And people often say, well, you know, nobody else does, and you know, I came from a state that doesn't do that. The problem is that, yes, it's a regressive tax that is a greater share or percentage of a low-income's budget, family's budget goes towards the sales tax or general excise tax. But we here in Hawaii take care of that by providing an income tax credit that offsets that cost. The problem with exempting or a blanket exemption for food or proprietary drugs or medical services is that it makes the system even more regressive from the standpoint that you can only eat so much. So you have a family of four with $100,000 income, family income. You have a family of four with a $20,000 family income. Almost all of the low-income families' budget will be subject to the tax because most of that $20,000 is going to go for food and shelter. And of course, rent is subject to the tax, and unlike any other state. Whereas the family at $100,000 income level, probably only at $20,000 of their income is going to go for food and shelter. The other $80,000 escape taxation because it's not subject or consumed and subject to the 4% general excise tax.
I know you're an expert in affordable housing and also tax issues, but we often see legislators talking about, oh, they want to help the elderly, they want to help our senior citizens, our kapuna, they want to help the keiki and all this kind of stuff. But when they really actually keep raising the taxes more and more, then it just creates more homelessness and the need for affordable housing and the need for other services. It just seems like it's a bad cycle.
It is. I mean, from the standpoint that, as you characterize it, the general excise tax is a hidden tax. The tax, because it's imposed on overhead costs of a business, is worked into the price of the things that they sell or the services they sell. So an elderly person going in is going to pay the same price for, I'm going to make it up, a shovel, that, you know, a middle or higher income family is going in, they buy the same shovel. Whether or not the poor person can afford that shovel, the price is the same, and the price is higher as a result of the overhead costs of the business that's selling the shovel. So it really does increase the cost of the shovel. The poor family probably can least likely to expend the dollars for that shovel, whereas the well-to-do family or the middle-income family, okay, they can afford it, but it's still expensive.
So what about this petty that the teachers are asking for an increase? Go a little bit more into that, and how would that affect the rate of the general excise tax?
Well, you'd raise, of course, we're currently at a statewide rate of 4%, 4.5% here in the city and county of Honolulu. One more penny is basically a 25% increase because it is 4%. One out of four is 25% increase in the costs. The problem we have is, again, is not only does the cost get passed on to the customer locally, but it also gets passed on to the cost of the goods and services we try to export out of the state to bring dollars into the state. So it puts us at a distinct disadvantage price-wise on the global marketplace. So the same item that is manufactured or created here in Hawaii and a similar one is made in Nevada or Arizona is certainly going to be a lot cheaper, a lot more inexpensive and more attractive than one made here in Hawaii because we are carrying the additional burden of the hidden tax of the general excise tax.
A lot of time when legislators start off, they start pushing these issues that get a lot of attention. We have marijuana legalization and whether it should be regulated and taxed. We have gambling, legalizing gambling, which we don't have in Hawaii. Some of the other, hot, passionate issues get attention, but a lot of times taxes don't. And of course, it's one of the most important, if not the most important topic, because it affects all of our lifestyles. And I think a lot of times people tune out and they say, oh, that's stuff I don't have to worry about. But it actually raises the cost of everything in Hawaii. And talk a little bit about, say, the bottle tax.
Well, let me go back first of all and
Sure.
go back to that familiar saying, the root of all evil is money.
Yeah.
And everything that government provides needs money to fund. And if you don't have that money, then you can't provide the services. And it's a vicious circle. And when you have a impost or fee, a tax, a user charge for which there is no productive use, then all you do is create added costs that has no benefit basically for society. And one of them is the beverage deposit fee of a nickel plus a penny and a half on top of that. The whole philosophy behind that, and the motherhood and apple pie was that we charge a nickel and the penny and a half administrative fee, and it's going to make people want to run back and bring it back to the recycling center to get their nickel back. Well, there are an awful lot of people that look at the nickel and say, that's too much trouble, and they just toss it out the window. So it really doesn't change the habits of people of picking up their beverage containers as they should and returning them for recycling or putting them in the blue bin. And that's really what you want to achieve, is a change in people's habits or practices. And people who equate financial loss or gain miss the point that unless it's ingrained in the person to practice conservation and recycling, no amount of money is going to change that habit. And we see that with the beverage container fee. The only people that probably benefit are the recyclers, who, as you may recall, they used to pay me to bring back an aluminum can because that aluminum was valuable. Now I only get my own nickel back, and what happens to the aluminum can? The material is benefiting somebody. So I really question whether or not the nickel per beverage container is actually achieving its goal of reducing the amount of litter on our highways.
The other thing is, I wonder about this whole thing where, a lot of people just put their recycling in the city bin. And so you had kind of a duplicate effort rather than going back to waiting in line, getting, sometimes you don't get the full amount. I know with our kids, they take the bottles back and sometimes they'll just do it by weight.
Right.
And so they don't get the full amount back anyway. And so have you, looked into that issue about city recycling, taking you're talking about valuable, it is valuable. They're taking these items and then the consumer's missing out even more.
Right, and you wonder where those nickels go. And that's why this money is built up in the state fund, is that people don't actually get their nickels back. Many people just either toss them in the blue bins on the sidewalks, or they toss them in the recycling whatever is at the city parks. So the nickel goes where? What people don't realize is that that's money that could be put to work. And unfortunately, you collect the nickel, if it doesn't get reclaimed by the consumer, it sits in some fund someplace. And certainly, I'm sure our lawmakers would like to get their grimy hands all over that money, but they can't. But regardless of whether or not they can get their hands on it, it's money going to waste. It is a wasted asset sitting there because it hasn't been reclaimed and it's not being used for anything else. So in that sense, it really has imposed an additional cost of living here in Hawaii because it's money that's out of circulation. What if we took that money and left it in people's hands and they were able to go out to dinner one more time a week, or they were able to buy a new pair of shoes because those nickels do add up? And it's unfortunate you've extracted $20, $30, $40 million out of the economy, and that's not a very productive exercise.
Now, we've seen those funds be audited recently, and there was a very critical audit by Marion Higa, and also legislators have raided that fund in the past, right?
Right. They have, silently sucked money out of that fund.
So
And,
it's supposed to go to it's supposed to make the environment better, and yet it's
Right.
going into whatever they want.
Right. It's just being taken out, and it was just subtly taken out in the back pages of a very, very thick bill, and nobody noticed it in time. And suddenly the auditor is finding out, oh my goodness, it's not going for the purpose of recycling. It's not going for the purpose of refunding the nickel to the consumer. So again, you create these funds over which there is very little oversight and accountability, and the money disappears. And people say, well, it's because we're short-staffed. Well, then, you shouldn't be short-staffed if you have all this money. So where is the money going? And I think this is the big black hole, the labyrinth, if you will, of state government has become so bureaucratic that nobody can really track the numbers. We have a hard time tracking the numbers. And, sooner or later, that money's going to disappear. And there is a lack of accountability in state government. I think even lawmakers don't know for sure how much is actually in the fund, first of all, and whether or not it's being used appropriately.
Now, another item that we all use every day is a plastic bag. There was a fee or a tax put on that last year. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, last year there was an attempt by, again, the environmentalists to impose a fee of either 10 cents or 20 cents every time you had your goods were bagged at the store in a plastic container or a plastic bag. And it sounded like a really good idea, but in the face of the fact that 3 out of the 4 counties at the time had already banned plastic sacks, either at that time or in the near future, it didn't make a lot of sense to us that why would you impose this statewide fee when they're already banned in 3 out of the 4 counties. And the 4th county, Honolulu, was on the verge of adopting a similar ban. The second thing that troubled us is the fact that the money didn't go towards any kind of program or exercise or service that educated people about recycling plastic bags or using reusable cloth bags or fiber bags or whatever to take home their groceries. It went into the state forestry fund. And you go, well, wait a minute. Where's the direct relationship between those who benefit and those who pay? And they argued, well, plastic bags, blow in the wind and they go into our forests. And then go, well, how much does it cost to actually go after those plastic bags and how many of them? And, it was just another way to raise taxes, and it is the stealth tax, for a program that they couldn't find the funding for or they would have liked to take the funding from to fund another program. So, a lot of people didn't like us for blowing the whistle, but it was really in the interest of the average taxpayer that we blew the whistle and said, this is not appropriate. You shouldn't be taxing things which then the money doesn't go to try and correct. The beverage fee, well, maybe, yeah. But again, where was the education to change people's habits? It was just merely a carrot and a stick. This carrot, you get your nickel back. It's a stick, if you don't pick it up and take it back because we'll keep your nickel. And that just doesn't work. I just think that our lawmakers need to get beyond their kind of kindergarten attitude of we can train people by just slapping them on the wrist with another fee.
Now, another thing that we all consume quite a bit of is soda.
That's right.
I mean, personally, I drink green tea, but a lot of people I know drink soda. And the governor has proposed since he's been in office, to create a soda tax. And at one time, he even talked about a sugar tax. And what's your feeling on that tax?
And certainly, across the nation, Mayor Bloomberg is, the big gulp tax, as we call it in New York City, 32-ounce servings of soft drinks are getting a financial hit. And other states, California had, I think, two counties or 2 cities had referendums this past fall, both of which failed. And so people have looked at soda, at least for the longest time, to say, well, it's the reason why our children are obese. And I'm sitting there and I'm going, have you taken a lesson from the First Lady? One of the reasons why our children are obese is because they've stopped playing in the playground. And if there's anything that has made our children sedentary, if you will, is these little things that you hold in your hand. I mean, I see kids sitting in a corner, instead of on the playground, texting their friends. If we're going to be nasty and mean and financially punish people financially for this, then let's impose a fee on iPods and those types of things, all these electronic handheld devices, because they're a major reason why kids are not moving. How would people feel that in place of, say, a soda tax, that we impose a $200 obesity tax on handheld electronic devices? That makes about as much sense. If we're going to really address the issue of childhood obesity, we need to take a comprehensive approach to it. The First Lady has indeed pointed out some of the major reasons. One, children don't get up and exercise, they don't get around and move. And second, they need to eat healthy food. And that only comes about when their parents or their mentors, be they teachers or pastors or whatever, mentor them to eat healthy. Just imposing a tax on a sugary drink is not going to solve the problem. And I think that people need to recognize that it is also the parental responsibility to make sure that children eat right and they consume food that's good for their bodies. I think the other thing too is, I think when you look at it, it's also a regressive tax, the soda tax, in that soda's cheap. You know, compared to $4 or $6 a gallon of milk, you know, you can get a 12-pack of soda for less than $3. So naturally, for a poor family, it's a cheaper way to keep your kids happy is to give them soda. And whereas, you know, a more sophisticated, better income family is going to say, no, we can afford the milk, we'll buy you, in fact, organic milk. Well, you know, when you start imposing a fee on soda, you're basically levying it on those who least can afford to buy nutritious food.
And don't, I mean, people should understand there's already a tax on soda. There's a bottle tax on the can or bottle. There's a general excise tax there already. And probably the people who are storing it pay a property tax, and there's a lot of taxes already involved in this soda.
Right.
So, but this is just another tax on top of it.
Well, and it's another tax in the name of good health. And I just take great reservation that, you know, they're trying to blame, you know, sugary drinks, when it's really a habit that the parent of a child should take responsibility for. We're saying, well, government knows best, so what we're going to do is just make it so expensive, and therefore kids are not going to drink it. Well, if kids have been addicted to soda because that's the cheapest drink their parents can afford, it's going to be a real difficult task.
Well, we already tax gas. We have among the highest tax on gas, or the highest.
We are the highest.
The highest. We have among the highest, what is it, cigarettes and liquor.
Beer is probably one of the highest. Right.
We have property taxes. We have, let me see.
Income taxes.
Income taxes.
With the highest rates.
Highest rates in the country for income tax. Right. We have, like we said, bottle tax, the fee on bags or tax, depending what you want to call it. There's just even your car registration has a tax.
Right.
So tell me what's next.
I think our lawmakers have basically run out of taxes to raise. And so one of those taxes you just mentioned popped up last year. As you may all have learned over the last 12 months, we all went to re-register our vehicles, how expensive the motor vehicle weight tax has become, the registration fee has become. Well, last year in session, the Department of Health wanted to add another $1 on your vehicle registration fee to pay for their program for the handicapped. Those are those little programs where you have designated stalls, you have free metered parking, and that's because the federal funding had disappeared, and so the state had to pick up the funding for that program. And we were told that the $1 per vehicle fee was going to relieve the general fund of a $500,000 responsibility, if you will, because that's what it cost to run the program at the time. And we all kind of sat there in the hearing and said, let's see, $500,000 program, $1 per car, There are over 1 million cars in the state. What this program the Department of Health was asking was to double their budget. And it just didn't make any sense. I mean, you know, okay, yeah, you want to raise the money, but there's got to be a direct relationship between the beneficiaries of the program and those who pay for the program. So if you're going to raise the fee to pay for the program, then look at those who will benefit from the program before imposing it on everybody. And at that point, doubling your budget.
So we only have about a minute and a half left, but tell us what's going to come up, do you think, in this session? How are they going to get more money? Because the budget's being increased by 11%, 8% one year and 11% the next in the governor's request. And how are lawmakers going to get this money?
I think that the House at least has taken the pledge against raising the general excise tax rate. And they kind of got back to the corner on that one because the Tax Review Commission had raised the issue early on last summer. I think what lawmakers will resort to are the stealth taxes. There's nothing left. They have raised the higher rates on higher income individuals under the net income tax. That won't expire for another couple of years. They've taken away a lot of the exemptions under the general excise tax as a way to avoid raising the general excise tax rate. So they pretty much, Malia, have run out of ways to raise direct taxes. So the only thing I can see is that they will come through the back door and raise fees. So the soda tax is an excellent example. I do think as a result of the change in leadership in the House, gaming is going to be on the table. And unfortunately, while people look at that as the panacea, the pill that'll solve the problem of money, people should realize it also comes with added expenses. It is a very, very expensive operation to monitor and to enforce. And what money we may gain, we actually may lose.
All right, Lowell, thank you so much. People can support the Tax Foundation of Hawaii. You're a nonprofit and you're a wonderful watchdog. I want to thank you for coming on the show and sharing your knowledge.
My pleasure.
This has been News Behind the News. Aloha.